The real question is whether the police can prove that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor wilfully misconducted himself, presumably in his role as trade envoy, to such a degree as to amount to an abuse of the public's trust in him.
So let's talk to Joshua Rozenberg, solicitor and legal affairs commentator. Good afternoon, Joshua.
Good afternoon.
I think unprecedented is probably the word of the day, isn't it? What would you say about that?
Certainly is. There was an incident more than 20 years ago when the Princess Royal was charged with, I think, allowing her dogs to roam free. So the royal family are not above the law, something which I think politicians and indeed the King has been emphasising today. But we've not seen a member of the royal family arrested, having his homes searched, that sort of thing, in modern times. It's pretty shocking.
It is, actually, if we're honest, it's shocking. Can you just take us behind that allegation of misconduct in public office? Now, what actually does that mean, Joshua?
This is what we call a common law offence. In other words, one that has been developed by the courts over the centuries, in fact. That has two consequences. First of all, there's no maximum penalty. The maximum you could get would be life imprisonment. And secondly, it's a bit vague and perhaps a little bit difficult to prove, although I put that point at a briefing to the Director of Public Prosecutions a week or so ago, and he said the law's pretty clear. And that's because 20 years ago, a court laid down principles distilled from previous cases. And what the offence amounts to is you have to have a public officer. It's not clear what that is. It could be an MP, it could be a minister, often it could be police officers and prison officers, but it could be anybody working as a public officer who is acting as such in that position, who willfully neglects to perform his duty or willfully misconducts himself to such a degree as to amount to an abuse of the public's trust in the office holder without reasonable excuse or justification. Now, that's quite a mouthful. Mm-hmm. The real question is whether the police can prove that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor willfully misconducted himself, presumably in his role as trade envoy, to such a degree as to amount to an abuse of the public's trust in him.
I see. Now, it has already cropped up, but I wonder if you could just tell people, because people are coming to Times Radio all the time, exactly what the law says about how long somebody can be held for.
Yes, you normally are not held for more than 24 hours. I wouldn't have thought he would be held any longer than this evening, because the police will be talking to him, and the question is he going to say anything? Now, it's only speculation, obviously, but I would be surprised if he said very much at all. I can't imagine him going into any details. He would have his lawyer with him. The lawyer would advise him not to say very much, if anything at all. So at some point, the police will come to the conclusion that there is nothing more to be gained from interviewing him at this point. Also, perhaps they will have decided that there's nothing more to be gained by a search of the property he was living in Norfolk for the past couple of weeks. So presumably he could safely go back there without any disruption to the police searches. So I wouldn't have thought he's going to be kept beyond the evening. He can be kept for more than 24 hours, and indeed the courts can authorise a longer detention. But that doesn't seem to be very likely in a case like this.
But most of us have not, fortunately for us, been arrested. What happens to someone who's arrested? Are your possessions, all your personal possessions, taken away from you?
Not necessarily. Certainly one of the reasons for arresting somebody is in order to search them. Well, they're not likely to have any, somebody like him is not likely to have anything on him that's going to incriminate him. But certainly search his home, his property, his computers, his files, his papers, his documents. Again, not very likely that he's going to have anything with him in Norfolk if he moved there rather suddenly a couple of weeks ago. So I'm not sure that's going to get the police very far, possibly more in where he used to live, in Windsor. But really, I think any evidence in this case is going to come from official sources, from government sources. We heard that Gordon Brown had made various representations to various police forces a few weeks ago, the former Prime Minister. And obviously, if he was If he is being investigated in connection with his role as a trade envoy, then government departments will have records of where he went, who he spoke to, what he said, emails he may have sent, that sort of thing. And that's the sort of thing that the police are going to look at. That's going to take weeks, months, I would have thought. And in the meantime, I would expect him to be released on bail.
Right, that is your hunch that he will be let out at some point today.
I would have thought so. I can't see any particular point in making him spend the night in a police cell. That would just be humiliating him for no obvious purpose, unless there was some operational reason. I mean, this can happen, if you arrest several people who are connected in a conspiracy and you want to stop them talking to each other before they've all been spoken to. But I don't think anything like that applies here. So I would have thought that after an interview with the police, he would be free to return on bail.
Right. Now, we know that in this instance, he has been arrested in connection with one offence. We should, of course, make clear that he denies any wrongdoing. But if he were to be linked to other offences, would he need to be rearrested?
I don't think so, no, because I imagine that the police would be searching for any evidence that could be used against him of any crime. Again, I can't imagine that's very likely in terms of what they may find at his homes. But nevertheless, they can search for that. The question ultimately is whether he's going to be charged or not. That's when we know whether he's going to face criminal proceedings or whether they're going to say, well, we've investigated, we haven't got any evidence, and that's the end of it. And at that point, they might bring charges of misconduct in public office, which is what he's being investigated for. It's conceivable if they find other evidence, then he could be charged with that. That may be at a separate time, maybe sooner, maybe later. So it's really the charge point where when one knows what allegations he's facing.
OK, and can I just put this question to you from a listener called Chris, who says, in general, how does the law view people who are aware of criminal activity within their circle but do nothing to report it?
I don't think there's a general obligation on individuals to report crimes, allegations of crimes by other people. Now, there are quite recently some new failure to prevent offences relating to bribery, corruption offences, things like that. But generally speaking, it's not an obligation on people who know about an offence to report it to the police, although you might say that a good citizen would do just that.
OK, thank you very much. Much appreciate your expertise, Joshua. Joshua Rozenberg, solicitor, legal affairs commentator. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor denies any wrongdoing.